My name is Susan, 37 years old, senior systems architect who built Techvision solutions from the ground up. For 14 years, every performance review came back with 5 stars. Then they hired Cassandra Mitchell as COO. She had a reputation for cleaning house, and I knew my days were numbered. What they never understood was that our entire infrastructure ran on my code, my design, with security protocols only I fully comprehended. One minor server hiccup was all it took for her to snap. Before I tell you how I brought a $500 million company to its knees without breaking a single law, drop a comment where you are watching from and subscribe to hear more corporate karma stories. I never went to an elite college or had the pedigree most tech companies look for. Growing up in Millfield, Ohio, population just under 3,000, I taught myself to code on a second-hand computer my mother saved up for months to buy me. While other teenagers were at football games, I was debugging my first programs and building simple websites for local businesses. I had big dreams but modest expectations. When I applied to Techvision Solutions, it was just a scrappy startup with 30 employees working out of a converted warehouse. Lawrence Richardson, the founder, interviewed me personally. Unlike other interviewers who seemed fixated on my lack of formal credentials, Lawrence was interested in how I thought. Education tells me what you were taught, he said, reviewing my self-taught portfolio. But this tells me what you can create. That's far more valuable. I started Monday as their junior developer. The company was developing custom software solutions for mid-sized businesses, nothing revolutionary yet, but Lawrence had vision. He believed business software didn't have to be clunky and unintuitive. He wanted to create systems that worked the way people thought. 6 months in, during a team brainstorming session, I proposed an architecture for a new integrated system that would eventually become our flagship product. Lawrence named it Atlas because he said it would carry the weight of the entire company on its shoulders. How prophetic those words would become. "Susan, this is brilliant," Lawrence said, examining my initial diagrams. "But implementation will be complex. Are you sure we can build this?" "Give me 6 developers and 8 months," I replied with the confidence of youth, "and I will give you something that will transform this company." Lawrence trusted me, though I was barely 24 and the least experienced programmer on staff. That was his gift, seeing potential where others saw risk. Atlas took 11 months rather than 8, but when we finished, we had created something special. It was an enterprise resource planning system that integrated everything from inventory management to customer relations to financial reporting, all with an interface that made intuitive sense. But what made Atlas truly unique was the back-end architecture. I had designed security protocols and redundancy systems that were unconventional but extraordinarily effective. "I don't understand half of what you've built here," Lawrence admitted one night as we were finalizing the first version for release. "But it works beautifully." "That's the point," I said. "The users should never have to understand the complexity underneath. They just need to know it works." Little did I know that this philosophy would eventually become my undoing. As Techvision grew, so did my responsibilities. Atlas was a hit, and within 3 years our client base had expanded from local businesses to national corporations. Our staff grew to over 100, then 200. I moved from junior developer to lead developer, then to development manager, and finally to senior systems architect. With each promotion came new challenges. We expanded Atlas, building new modules and capabilities. Each addition required integration with the core architecture that only I fully understood. I tried to document everything to train others on the underlying systems, but there was always another deadline, another feature to implement, another client need to address. "We need to get more people up to speed on the core systems," I told Lawrence during my 5th year. "I'm becoming a bottleneck." "Agreed," Lawrence said. "But every time we pull you away from development for training, we lose momentum on innovation. It's a catch-22. So we compromised. I trained Amanda Winters and Derek Thompson as my deputies. Both were brilliant programmers who had been with the company almost as long as I had. They understood large portions of Atlas, though neither comprehended the entire system as I did. Still, between the 3 of us, we managed the growing complexity. By year 8, Techvision had become an industry leader. We had offices in 6 cities and over 500 employees. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies, and Atlas had evolved into a suite of products generating hundreds of millions in annual revenue. The company culture had changed too. The familial atmosphere of the early years gave way to corporate hierarchies and departmental silos. New employees no longer knew everyone by name. All-hands meetings became quarterly presentations rather than daily check-ins around a single table. Through it all, Lawrence remained committed to the core values that had built the company. He recognized contribution, valued institutional knowledge, and understood that innovation came from trust and continuity as much as from disruption. Never forget that technology is built by people, he often reminded the executive team. The code reflects the coders. Our success comes from the minds that created our systems, not just the systems themselves. I believed in that vision, and it kept me loyal despite increasingly attractive offers from competitors. I turned down opportunities that would have doubled my salary because I felt ownership in what we were building. Techvision wasn't just where I worked, it was what I had helped create. In year 10, we faced our first major crisis. A sophisticated cyber attack targeted several of our largest clients. Other companies providing similar services suffered catastrophic breaches, but Atlas held firm. The unconventional security protocols I had built into the foundation of the system thwarted the attackers. "You just saved this company," Lawrence told me after 3 sleepless nights monitoring and reinforcing our defenses. Those security measures that seemed so unusual 5 years ago just proved their worth. The board recognized my contribution with a substantial bonus and a glowing commendation. Industry publications wrote about the mysterious architecture that had withstood attacks that crippled competitors. I became something of a legend in the company, the architect whose foresight had protected hundreds of millions in assets and company value. That reputation would serve me well in the coming years as I navigated the changing tides of corporate politics. But even legends become targets when new regimes take power. And power was about to change hands at Techvision Solutions. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning via company-wide email. After 14 years at the helm, Lawrence Richardson was stepping back from day-to-day operations. He would remain as chairman of the board, but the company was bringing in Martin Reynolds as the new chief executive officer. "This transition reflects the next phase of growth for Techvision," the email read. "Martin brings 20 years of experience scaling technology companies and preparing them for public offerings." The subtext was clear to anyone who had been with the company long enough. We were being positioned for an IPO, and Lawrence was making way for someone with experience in that arena. It made business sense but still sent ripples of uncertainty through the veteran employees. Martin Reynolds arrived the following Monday with an impressive resume and a corporate polish that seemed slightly out of place in our still somewhat casual culture. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and spoke in the measured tones of someone accustomed to having his words recorded and scrutinized. "I am not here to reinvent the wheel," he assured us during his first all-hands meeting. Techvision has built remarkable technology and a strong market position. My job is to prepare us for the next level of growth and investment. It sounded reassuring, but I had been through enough corporate transitions to maintain a healthy skepticism. New leaders always bring change regardless of their initial promises. 2 weeks later, Martin announced his first major decision, the hiring of Cassandra Mitchell as Chief Operating Officer. She came from Nexus Technologies, where she had earned a reputation as a ruthless efficiency expert and cost cutter. "Cassandra will help us optimize operations and streamline processes," Martin explained. "Her experience in preparing companies for public scrutiny will be invaluable as we move forward." My first meeting with Cassandra confirmed my worst fears. She had scheduled 30-minute introductory sessions with each department head, and as the senior systems architect, I was on her list. I prepared a concise overview of our technical infrastructure, focusing on how Atlas served as the foundation for all our products and services. "Fascinating history lesson," she interrupted 10 minutes into my presentation. "But I am more interested in how quickly we can modernize these systems. Legacy architecture is often a liability when investors conduct technical due diligence." The term legacy architecture stung. Atlas was continuously updated and remained years ahead of competing systems. "With respect, our architecture is not legacy in the traditional sense," I explained. "We have consistently evolved the platform to incorporate new technologies and methodologies. What appears conventional on the surface conceals highly innovative approaches underneath." Cassandra smiled thinly. "I am sure it was groundbreaking in its time, but markets evolve and so must we. I have engaged a consulting firm to evaluate our technical stack and recommend modernization strategies. Any significant changes should be carefully phased, I cautioned. The system has interdependencies that aren't immediately obvious. We do not have the luxury of incremental change, she replied. Not if we want to maximize valuation. Sometimes you have to break things to rebuild them properly. As I left her office, a chill ran down my spine. She had already decided our technology was outdated, without understanding what made it special. Worse, she seemed unconcerned about the risks of rapid change to complex systems. Over the next few weeks, Cassandra's influence became increasingly apparent. New policies appeared in our inboxes daily. Reporting structures were reorganized. Project priorities shifted with little explanation. The consultants she had mentioned began appearing in technical meetings asking questions that revealed their shallow understanding of our systems. After a particularly frustrating meeting where one consultant suggested replacing core components of Atlas with off-the-shelf solutions, I sought out Lawrence for guidance. He was still in the building occasionally, though his presence was increasingly rare. I am concerned about the direction Cassandra is taking the technical strategy, I told him. She seems determined to replace systems that are working perfectly well. Lawrence sighed suddenly, looking older than his 56 years. Politics and technology make uneasy bedfellows, Susan. Martin and Cassandra were hired to increase our valuation. New leadership always wants to put their stamp on things, even if it means dismantling what made the company valuable in the first place. Especially then, he said with a sad smile. It is hard for new leaders to take credit for existing success. They need to create their own narrative of transformation. But you are still chairman. Can you not intervene? I brought in Martin with the board's blessing. If I undermine him now, it creates instability that hurts everyone. Give them time. Good technology eventually speaks for itself. I wasn't reassured, especially when I overheard a conversation never meant for my ears. Passing by the executive conference room one evening, I heard Cassandra speaking to Martin. The IT department is the biggest concern, she was saying. Too many long-tenured employees with outdated skills. We need fresh blood and modern perspectives. Lawrence will push back on that, Martin replied. He is very loyal to the early team. Lawrence is not running operations anymore, Cassandra said firmly. And the IPO timeline does not allow for sentimentality. We need to show innovation and transformation, not decades-old systems maintained by the same people who built them. I walked away quickly before they could discover me, but the message was clear. In Cassandra's eyes, longevity had become a liability. Those of us who had built the company were now obstacles to her vision of transformation. The situation deteriorated further when Cassandra hired James Parker as Vice President of Technology Innovation, a newly created role that seemed designed to undermine my authority. James was 32 with an MBA from Wharton and a background at several high-profile tech companies, though notably brief tenures at each. James will help us identify breakthrough opportunities and technology partnerships, Cassandra announced. His fresh perspective will complement our existing technical leadership. In practice, James became Cassandra's technical mouthpiece, constantly pushing for radical changes without understanding the underlying complexity. He regularly criticized Atlas in meetings, calling it monolithic and outdated despite having never worked with comparable enterprise systems. We should be moving everything to microservices and cloud-native architecture, he declared during a strategy session, repeating buzzwords that were already becoming clichés in the industry. Parts of Atlas already use microservice architectures where appropriate, I countered. But wholesale migration would introduce unnecessary risks for features that don't benefit from that approach. That sounds like resistance to innovation, James replied with a condescending smile. Sometimes we need to embrace discomfort to move forward. It became a pattern. Every suggestion I made was labeled as resistance. Every caution about technical debt or migration risks was dismissed as fear of change. My 14 years of institutional knowledge became a target rather than an asset. Amanda and Derek felt the pressure too. As my closest allies and the only other staff who understood significant portions of Atlas, they were increasingly sidelined in technical discussions. They brought in 3 new architects last week, Amanda told me over lunch. All reporting to James, all pushing for complete rewrites of systems they barely understand. I found them trying to access the core security modules yesterday, Derek added. When I asked why, they said Cassandra had authorized a comprehensive security audit but could not produce any documentation. I began carefully documenting everything. Every meeting, every decision, every warning ignored. I created personal backups of my design documents and technical specifications. And I quietly prepared contingency plans for the disaster that seemed increasingly inevitable. It wasn't sabotage. It was preservation of institutional knowledge that I feared would be carelessly discarded. And as events would soon prove that foresight was entirely justified. By month 3 of the new regime, my role had been effectively diminished despite my unchanged title. Important technical decisions were made in meetings to which I was not invited. My team had been reorganized with key members reassigned to projects under James Parker's supervision. I was increasingly isolated, maintaining systems that Cassandra and James had already decided to replace. Still, I came in early and stayed late, doing everything possible to keep Atlas running smoothly despite the chaos of competing initiatives and conflicting directives. The system was my legacy, and I refused to let it fail on my watch even as others seemed determined to dismantle it. The incident occurred on a Wednesday evening during a routine maintenance window. We were implementing updates to several modules, including patches to the Customer Relationship Management subsystem. These updates had been tested extensively in our development environment, but as every experienced engineer knows, production systems sometimes behave differently. At exactly 9:17 p.m., several authentication servers began showing unusual patterns. The monitoring system alerted me immediately, and I recognized the symptoms of a cascading authentication issue. It wasn't critical yet, but left unchecked, it could affect customer access to their portals. Roll back the CRM patch, I instructed the operations team, and initiate the authentication reset sequence. Should not we notify management first? Asked Ryan, one of the newer operations engineers. Fix the problem first, notify after, I replied. The reset sequence will cause a 3-minute downtime for some users. If we wait for approval, it could become 30 minutes or more. Ryan hesitated but complied. The reset sequence worked exactly as designed. Authentication services came back online. The cascading failure stopped, and by 9:23 p.m., all systems were functioning normally. Total impact: approximately 200 customers experienced a brief disruption with no data loss or security breaches. In the old days, this would have been considered a successful incident response. Minor issues happen in complex systems, and what matters is how quickly and effectively they are resolved. But these were not the old days. At 9:30 a.m. the next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Cassandra had called an emergency executive meeting about the critical system failure and demanded my immediate attendance. When I arrived at the conference room, I found not just the executive team but also James Parker with a prepared presentation titled Infrastructure Stability Concerns. Susan, perhaps you can explain why our customers experienced service disruptions last night. Cassandra began, her tone making it clear this was an accusation rather than a question. We had a minor authentication issue during a scheduled maintenance window, I explained. The system's automated recovery protocols functioned as designed, and the total impact was minimal. Fewer than 1% of customers were affected, and only for approximately 3 minutes. James has a different assessment, Cassandra replied, gesturing for him to take over. James stood and began clicking through slides filled with ominous-looking charts and highlighted incident logs taken completely out of context. What we experienced was not minor, he declared. It was symptomatic of fundamental architectural flaws in the Atlas system. My analysis shows that similar incidents have increased 27% in the past quarter, suggesting growing instability. That was a blatant misrepresentation. We tracked every system hiccup meticulously, and there had been no such increase. If anything, stability had improved as we had refined monitoring and response protocols. Those statistics are incorrect, I interjected. Our incident tracking shows no significant change in system stability. I would be happy to review the raw data with the team. The raw data is precisely the problem, James continued, talking over me. It is buried in proprietary monitoring systems that only Susan and her immediate team can properly interpret. This creates a dangerous dependency and lack of transparency. Each time I attempted to correct his technical misrepresentations, Cassandra would interrupt. Let James finish his analysis, she repeated, effectively preventing me from addressing the inaccuracies being presented as fact. By the end of the meeting, James had painted a picture of a fragile, outdated system on the verge of collapse, maintained by a possessive architect unwilling to embrace modern methodologies. It was character assassination disguised as technical assessment, and the worst part was watching the executives, including Martin Reynolds, nodding along. Based on this analysis, I am accelerating our infrastructure modernization initiative, Cassandra announced. James will lead a task force to develop a transition plan away from the current architecture. Any transition needs to be carefully managed, I cautioned. Rushing could create exactly the instability you are concerned about. We will take your input under advisement, Cassandra replied dismissively. Though frankly, your resistance to change is becoming a pattern. I left that meeting knowing my days were numbered. The narrative had been established. I was the stubborn architect clinging to outdated systems, the obstacle to progress that the new leadership needed to overcome. The following weeks confirmed my assessment. I was excluded from strategic planning sessions. My access to certain system administration tools was revoked for security standardization. New hires in the IT department were instructed to report to James rather than me, despite my nominal position as senior systems architect. Amanda caught me in the break room after a particularly frustrating meeting where my concerns about a proposed database migration had been completely dismissed. You need to know something, she said, keeping her voice low. I saw a document on Cassandra's assistant's desk yesterday. It was a layoff list for the technical reorganization. Your name was at the top. Not surprising, I replied, trying to maintain composure despite the knot forming in my stomach. Any other names I should know about? Mine. Derek's. Basically anyone who understands how Atlas really works. That evening I stayed late methodically documenting everything about the core systems that was not already in our technical specifications. Not the surface-level documentation that any decent engineer could figure out, but the deep architectural decisions, the security implementations, the recovery protocols that made Atlas uniquely resilient. I organized it all into a comprehensive transition guide, the document I would have wanted if I were taking over a complex system. Then I encrypted it and stored it in my personal cloud account. Not company property, but my own professional notes accumulated over 14 years of building and maintaining the system. I also prepared what I later came to think of as my insurance policy. It wasn't malicious code or a deliberate backdoor. Nothing so unethical or potentially illegal. It was simply a detailed understanding of how the authentication system's ultimate failsafe worked, a protocol I had designed years earlier, but had never fully documented in the official specifications. The principle was simple. If multiple authentication failures occurred in specific patterns, the system would initiate a security lockdown, requiring manual reset with cryptographic keys that only I possessed. It was designed as protection against sophisticated intrusion attempts, a last-ditch defense that had never been needed in production. But I knew that if the new team started making the changes James was proposing without understanding the underlying architecture, they would eventually trigger that failsafe. And when they did, they would discover just how dependent they still were on the institutional knowledge they were so eager to discard. It was not sabotage. It was simply deciding not to volunteer information that had never been requested about a security system working exactly as designed. If they had asked, I would have explained it fully. But they never asked, because asking would mean admitting they didn't understand something fundamental about the systems they were so eager to replace. As Amanda had warned, the technical reorganization was coming, and I was its primary target. I updated my resume, contacted a few trusted industry connections, and prepared for the inevitable. What I didn't expect was just how vindictive that inevitability would be. Friday mornings at Techvision traditionally started with department stand-up meetings, brief check-ins where team members shared their progress and plans. I had continued this practice even as my team had been gradually reassigned or replaced. That particular Friday, I arrived early as usual, prepared my status updates, and headed to our regular conference room. The room was empty except for Cassandra Mitchell and a woman I recognized from Human Resources, Patricia Garcia. Susan, please come in and close the door, Cassandra said, not bothering with any greeting. My heart rate accelerated, but I kept my expression neutral as I sat down across from them. I had been expecting this moment, but the reality of it still sent adrenaline coursing through my system. I will get straight to the point, Cassandra continued. Techvision is moving in a new technical direction that requires different leadership. Today will be your last day with the company. Despite my mental preparation, the words landed like a physical blow. 14 years dismissed in a single sentence. I see. I managed keeping my voice steady. May I ask about the transition plan for my responsibilities? Cassandra's expression hardened. James Parker will be assuming oversight of the architecture team effective immediately. We have prepared a transition memo based on the documentation you should have been maintaining. The implication that I had neglected documentation was another calculated insult. I had meticulously documented everything, but much of my recent work had been systematically ignored or dismissed. There are several critical projects in progress, I began, and aspects of the system that require specific knowledge to maintain properly. That is precisely the problem, Cassandra interrupted. You have created systems that are unnecessarily dependent on your personal involvement. That is not sustainable for a company of our size and ambition. I took a deep breath. I have repeatedly offered to train additional staff on these systems. Those requests were denied. I have submitted detailed documentation that has been ignored. I have raised concerns about hasty architectural changes that were dismissed as resistance. Patricia from HR shifted uncomfortably, but Cassandra's expression only grew colder. This is not a negotiation or a debate, she snapped. The decision has been made at the highest levels. You will be provided with 4 weeks of severance contingent upon signing our standard separation agreement. 4 weeks. After 14 years. The insulting inadequacy of it momentarily left me speechless. We will need your company laptop and access cards. Patricia added her tone, suggesting she was merely following protocol. Your accounts have already been deactivated. That explained why my badge had been denied at the side entrance, forcing me to enter through the main lobby. They had begun erasing me before I even arrived for my final day. I would like to collect my personal items, I said. You will be escorted to your desk by security, Cassandra replied. Standard protocol for technical staff separations. As if on cue, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Men I had nodded to every morning for years now, assigned to watch me as if I were a potential criminal. This is unnecessary, I said. I have no intention of causing any disruption. I do not care about your intentions, Cassandra replied. I care about protecting company assets and intellectual property. Something in me snapped, not outwardly, not in any way they could see, but inside a final thread of loyalty severed. I built those assets, I said quietly. I created that intellectual property. Everything that makes Atlas valuable came from my work and the team you have been systematically dismantling. I do not care about your process. Cassandra suddenly shouted, her composure finally cracking. Clear your desk now. The outburst echoed in the small conference room. Patricia looked mortified. Even the security guards seemed uncomfortable. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt with deliberate calm that I did not feel. I will comply with your request. But I want it noted that I am being terminated without cause after 14 years of exemplary service with no meaningful transition period for critical systems that I personally designed and maintained. Noted, Patricia said quickly before Cassandra could respond. The walk to my desk was excruciating. Word had already spread, and colleagues watched from behind monitors and cubicle walls as I was paraded through the office under guard. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others stared openly, perhaps wondering if they would be next. Derek approached as I began packing my personal items into a cardboard box provided by security. This is wrong, he said quietly. Everyone knows it. Thanks, I murmured. Watch your back. You and Amanda are probably next. I will call you later, he promised, before one of the guards pointedly cleared his throat, causing Derek to step away. My desk of 14 years yielded surprisingly few personal items. Some framed photos, a collection of stress toys, reference books I had accumulated. The real value, my contributions to the company, could not be packed into a box or erased from the systems. As security escorted me toward the exit, we passed the server room, where the primary Atlas infrastructure hummed behind glass walls. I paused briefly, looking at the blinking lights of machines containing code I had written, systems I had architected, protocols I had designed. Keep moving, please, one guard said not unkindly. Outside the October, air felt unusually cold as I placed my box in the trunk of my car. 14 years ended in less than 30 minutes. No goodbye party, no well wishes. Not even the courtesy of a transition period. Just the cold efficiency of corporate disposal. The drive home passed in a blur of shock and disbelief. Traffic lights changed, other cars moved around me, but I operated on autopilot, my mind replaying the morning's events on endless loop. By the time I reached my apartment, anger had begun to replace the initial shock. I set the box of personal items on my kitchen counter and opened my laptop, the personal one, not the company machine, now being wiped clean of any trace of me. The severance agreement had already arrived by email, a 12-page document of legal language that essentially required me to sign away any rights to contest my termination in exchange for a paltry 4 weeks of pay. One clause in particular caught my attention, a broad non-disparagement provision that would prevent me from discussing any negative aspects of my employment or termination. Another required me to certify that I had returned or destroyed all company information and intellectual property defined so broadly that it could arguably include knowledge in my own head. As I contemplated the document, my phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Your personal items from your desk drawers have been mailed to your home address. Do not attempt to return to the premises. This matter is considered closed. No signature, no courtesy. Just final confirmation that 14 years of loyalty and contribution had been reduced to a box in the mail and a digital severance agreement designed to silence me. In that moment, I made my decision. I would not sign. 4 weeks of severance was not worth surrendering my right to tell the truth about what had happened. And as for what would happen next, well, that was entirely in the hands of people who had just demonstrated how little they valued the institutional knowledge walking out their door. I closed my laptop, made a cup of tea, and waited for the reality of unemployment to fully sink in. I had savings. I had marketable skills. I would survive this betrayal. What remained to be seen was whether Techvision would survive without me. I spent Saturday in a daze, alternating between bursts of furious job searching and periods of stunned inactivity on my couch. Friends called, having heard through the grapevine about my sudden departure. I gave them the bare facts, not yet ready to dive into the emotional aspects of being discarded by the company I had helped build. Sunday morning, I woke to an email from Lawrence Richardson. The subject line was simply, "I just heard. Susan, I have been traveling in Europe and only just learned about your termination. This was not handled properly, and for that, I am deeply sorry. When I return next week, I would like to meet and discuss this situation. Please know that your contributions to Techvision have been immeasurable regardless of current management decisions." It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. At least someone from the company acknowledged the inappropriateness of how I had been treated. Later that day, my phone rang with a call from Derek. "Are you sitting down?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, what's happening?" "Remember how you always warned about making multiple authentication changes simultaneously?" He kept his voice low, suggesting he was calling from somewhere within the office. Well, James decided to implement his new streamlined authentication protocol this weekend, without testing, without understanding the existing security layers. A cold certainty settled in my stomach. Let me guess. Cascading authentication failures. Started about an hour ago. At first, just a few customer portals went offline. Then more. Now the entire client-facing system is unreachable. Internal systems started failing about 20 minutes ago. I closed my eyes, visualizing exactly what was happening within the Atlas architecture. The authentication subsystem had detected patterns consistent with an attack vector and had initiated its ultimate protection protocol, just as I had designed it to do. They must be in full panic mode, I said. Cassandra called an all-hands emergency meeting. James is trying to blame it on technical debt and architectural flaws you left behind. But everyone who knows anything about the system knows this is because they started changing things they didn't understand. Have they asked for help? I couldn't keep a hint of satisfaction from my voice. Not yet. James keeps insisting he can fix it, but he can't even identify where the lockout is originating from, let alone how to reset it. I knew exactly where it was originating from. I knew precisely how to reset it. The protocol required cryptographic keys that only I possessed, generated years ago as a last resort security measure and stored in a password manager that only I could access. How bad will this get? Derek asked. If they don't resolve it. By tomorrow morning, every customer will be locked out of their portals. By tomorrow afternoon, the internal systems will be completely inaccessible, except for basic functionality. The data is safe, but nobody will be able to access it until the authentication system is properly reset. Can it be fixed without you? I considered the question carefully. Theoretically, yes. Someone could rebuild the authentication system from scratch, bypassing the security lockout. But that would take weeks, not hours. And they would need to understand the underlying architecture first. After we hung up, I sat looking out my apartment window, contemplating the situation. This was not sabotage. I had not planted a time bomb or created a deliberate backdoor. The system was functioning exactly as designed, protecting itself against what it perceived as unauthorized changes to core security protocols. The fact that the new team had triggered these protections through their hasty, uninformed changes was their responsibility, not mine. Still, I had known this might happen. I had chosen not to volunteer information about this particular security feature during my final weeks, as I watched them systematically dismantle my role and dismiss my expertise. Was that ethical? I believed it was. I had documented the feature years earlier, but like much of my documentation in recent months, it had likely been ignored or discarded as they rushed to implement their modernization. My phone buzzed again. A text from Amanda: stock price will take a hit tomorrow if this isn't resolved. Clients already calling emergency support lines. Cassandra blaming everyone but herself. I put my phone on silent and made dinner, trying to focus on normal Sunday evening activities rather than the chaos unfolding at my former workplace. If they wanted my help, they knew how to reach me. Until then, this was no longer my emergency to solve. Monday morning, I awoke to dozens of notifications. Missed calls from unknown numbers, emails from former colleagues, text messages from Amanda and Derek providing updates on the escalating situation. One message stood out: a voicemail from Martin Reynolds, the CEO. Susan, this is Martin Reynolds. We are experiencing significant technical difficulties that may relate to systems you designed. I would appreciate a return call at your earliest convenience to discuss potential consulting assistance. The carefully neutral language made me smile grimly. Significant technical difficulties was quite an understatement for what was likely a complete system meltdown by now. I did not immediately return the call. Instead, I checked the business news. Sure enough, Techvision stock had dropped 15% in pre-market trading on reports of widespread service outages affecting major clients. Analysts were speculating about potential cybersecurity breaches or infrastructure failures. Another text arrived from Derek. They flew in some consultant named Gabriel Winters this morning. Supposedly a genius troubleshooter. Cassandra is telling everyone he'll have it fixed within hours. Gabriel Winters. The name was familiar. He had a reputation as a technical miracle worker called in when companies faced seemingly insurmountable system failures. His consulting fees were legendary, rumored to start at $10,000 per day plus expenses. I went for a run, deliberately leaving my phone at home. The automator cleared my head, helping me think through my options. By the time I returned, I had decided on my approach. This was a professional crossroads, and how I handled it would define the next phase of my career. I called Martin Reynolds back. Susan, thank you for returning my call, he said, the relief evident in his voice. We are experiencing some technical challenges that might benefit from your insights. I understand you are dealing with a complete authentication system failure. I replied, not bothering with the euphemisms. One that has locked out both customers and employees from the Atlas platform. A pause. That is correct. Our team has been unable to identify the root cause or implement a solution. We have engaged external expertise, but progress has been limited. Gabriel Winters is good, I said, but even he cannot solve a problem without understanding the underlying architecture. That takes time you don't have. Every hour of downtime is costing the company millions in lost productivity and reputational damage. Another pause, longer this time. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that I might be able to assist, but not under the terms of the severance agreement I was offered. My consulting rate is $15,000 per day with a minimum commitment of 3 days. I would require a formal retainer agreement and full access to the systems. That's kit substantial. So is the cost of extended downtime for a $500 million company whose entire value proposition is based on system reliability. I could almost hear him calculating the costs in his head. The math was simple. Even at my steep consulting rate, resolving the issue quickly would save the company far more than they would pay me. I will need to consult with the executive team, he finally said. Of course. I will be available until noon. After that, I have a job interview with one of your competitors. That last part was a bluff, but an effective one. Within 30 minutes, my phone rang again. This time, it was Patricia from Human Resources. We would like to engage your consulting services immediately, she said. I am sending over a contract for your review. The contract appeared in my email moments later. It was straightforward $15,000 per day for up to 5 days of technical consulting services. No non-disparagement clause. No extensive intellectual property provisions. Just a simple exchange of expertise for compensation. I signed it, changed into business attire, and drove back to the company that had unceremoniously ejected me 3 days earlier. This time there would be no security escort. This time I was entering on my terms. The atmosphere at Techvision headquarters was noticeably tense when I arrived. The normally bustling lobby was quiet, with security guards speaking in hushed tones. The receptionist recognized me immediately, her eyes widening in surprise. Miss Wallace, I didn't expect. That is, I will let Mr. Reynolds know you are here. Thank you, Jennifer, I replied, remembering her name as I always had, unlike the executives who rarely bothered. Martin Reynolds himself came to escort me upstairs, a courtesy I had never received as an employee. Thank you for coming so quickly, he said, leading me toward the executive conference room rather than the technical operations center where the actual problem resided. We have assembled the key team members to brief you on the situation. The key team members turned out to include Cassandra Mitchell, James Parker, and a man I didn't recognize but assumed was Gabriel Winters. Cassandra's expression upon seeing me was a complex mixture of anger, embarrassment, and desperation. James looked like he had not slept in 24 hours, his usual polished appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and anxious eyes. Let's get straight to the point, Martin began once we were seated. Our systems have been experiencing catastrophic authentication failures since yesterday afternoon. Despite extensive efforts, we have been unable to restore functionality. Customers are demanding answers, and the financial impact is growing by the hour. I nodded but said nothing, waiting. James, please summarize the technical situation, Martin continued. James cleared his throat. We implemented several planned authentication optimizations yesterday as part of our modernization initiative. Shortly after deployment, we began seeing cascading authentication failures across multiple subsystems. Initial attempts to roll back the changes were unsuccessful. We have tried restart sequences, database restores, and certificate regeneration without success. His explanation was technically accurate but strategically misleading. They hadn't implemented optimizations. They had made fundamental changes to security protocols they didn't understand. And you are? I asked, turning to the unknown man. Gabriel Winters, he replied with a slight nod. Independent systems consultant. I was brought in this morning to provide additional technical perspective. Have you made any progress identifying the root cause? I asked him directly, bypassing James. Gabriel's expression was professionally neutral, but I detected a hint of respect in his eyes. I have identified what appears to be a sophisticated security lockout protocol triggered by the authentication changes. It's elegant work, actually. The system detected what it interpreted as potentially malicious modifications to core security components and initiated a protective lockdown. Standard recovery methods won't work because the lockout is enforcing cryptographic verification at multiple levels. At least someone in the room understood what they were dealing with. The obvious question, Gabriel continued, is whether you possess the cryptographic keys necessary to reset the authentication system. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment of truth, the leverage point in this unexpected power shift. I do, I confirmed. The protocol was designed years ago as a last resort protection against sophisticated attacks that might compromise multiple security layers simultaneously. It requires specific cryptographic keys to reset. Why wasn't this documented in the system specifications? James demanded. It was I, replied calmly. In the original security architecture documents from version 3.2. Those documents were flagged for executive review during the last security audit. I can only assume they were not prioritized during your modernization planning. Cassandra's face flushed. We both knew those documents had likely been among the many she had dismissed as legacy documentation not worth reviewing. Can you restore the system? Martin asked, cutting to the chase. Yes, I said. But before I do, I want to be clear about something. This is not a case of sabotage or deliberately hidden functionality. This is a security protocol functioning exactly as designed, protecting the system against what it perceived as unauthorized changes to core components. The fact that it was triggered accidentally rather than by an actual attack doesn't change how it operates or how it needs to be reset. We can discuss the design philosophies later, Cassandra said tersely. Right now we need the systems restored. Agreed, I replied. But understanding how we got here is crucial to preventing it from happening again. So let me be explicit, this occurred because fundamental changes were made to security subsystems without sufficient understanding of their interdependencies. Any future modifications should be approached with greater caution and more comprehensive review of existing documentation. Martin nodded. Noted. How quickly can you implement the reset? The actual reset procedure will take less than 15 minutes once I have access to the core administrative console. However, I'll need to verify the state of several subsystems first to ensure a clean restart. Total time approximately 2 hours. 2 hours? Cassandra looked incredulous. We've been down for nearly 24 hours, and you're saying you can fix it in 2? That's correct, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. Then let's proceed immediately, Martin said, standing. Gabriel, please assist Susan with whatever she needs. James informed the technical teams to be ready for system restoration. As we left the conference room, I noticed Lawrence Richardson standing in the hallway. He must have returned early from his European trip, likely called back by the crisis. He gave me a small nod, his expression a mixture of regret and vindication. Gabriel and I headed to the Technical Operations Center, where anxious engineers looked up hopefully as we entered. Many were familiar faces, colleagues I had worked alongside for years. Some offered quiet greetings or apologetic smiles. I need a secure workstation with administrator access to the core system, I told the operations manager. While they prepared a workstation, Gabriel spoke quietly. For what it's worth, it took me about 10 seconds at the terminal to recognize your authentication design. Brilliant work. Most companies implement security as layers of separate systems. You built it as an integrated fabric with self-protecting capabilities. Thank you, I replied. It was designed to protect against threats that might bypass traditional perimeter security, including the threat of hasty internal changes, apparently, he added with the ghost of a smile. Once the workstation was ready, I began the methodical process of assessing the system state and preparing for the authentication reset. Gabriel watched with professional curiosity, occasionally asking insightful questions about design decisions I had made years earlier. After confirming that all subsystems were in a consistent state, I opened a secure password manager on my phone, retrieved the necessary cryptographic keys, and began the reset sequence. As I had estimated, the actual reset took less than 15 minutes. Systems came back online in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Authentication services resumed normal operation, and access was gradually restored to all components. 2 hours after entering the building, I pressed the final command that completed the system restoration. Around the operations center, monitors displayed green status indicators as services reconnected and functionality returned to normal. A spontaneous cheer erupted from the technical staff. Some exchanged high fives or relieved hugs. Others began immediately checking customer-facing systems to confirm everything was functioning correctly. Gabriel closed his laptop and gave me a respectful nod. Elegant solution to a problem that should never have happened. The best security problems are the ones you prevent rather than solve, I replied. Martin and Cassandra appeared in the operations center doorway, having evidently been monitoring the situation from elsewhere. Martin looked genuinely relieved. Cassandra's expression was harder to read, a mixture of relief at the crisis resolution and discomfort at owing that resolution to someone she had so recently discarded. The systems are fully restored, I announced. All customer portals are accessible, and internal systems are functioning normally. I've implemented additional safeguards to prevent similar issues during future modifications, but I strongly recommend a comprehensive review of the security architecture before any further changes are attempted. Excellent work, Martin said. Truly excellent. I need a moment with Gabriel. Cassandra interjected. They stepped aside for a private conversation, but from Gabriel's body language and occasional glances in my direction, I could guess the topic. He was likely explaining just how preventable this entire situation had been. As the immediate crisis response wound down, Lawrence approached me. "May I speak with you privately?" he asked. We found a quiet corner of the break room now, mostly empty as everyone focused on verifying system functionality. "I owe you an apology," Lawrence began. "I brought in new leadership to help scale the company, but I failed to ensure they understood the value of the people who built it. Especially you. You couldn't have known they would handle things this way," I offered. "Perhaps not specifically, but I've seen this pattern before. New executives often mistake experience for entrenchment and institutional knowledge for resistance to change." He sighed. "The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. The outage has cost us millions in immediate damages, not to mention the reputational impact. What will happen with Cassandra? That will be determined at the meeting, but her position is precarious. Firing the architect of the company's core systems days before a catastrophic failure that only that architect could fix. It's not a narrative that inspires confidence in her judgment." I nodded, unsurprised. Corporate politics had its own form of justice, swift and unsentimental. "Would you consider returning?" Lawrence asked. "Not as an employee, but perhaps as a technical advisor during this transition period. The company needs your expertise now more than ever." The question gave me pause. 24 hours earlier, I had been contemplating lawsuits and plotting career moves to competing firms. Now I was being offered a path back, albeit in a different capacity. "I need to think about that," I replied honestly. "A lot has happened in the past few days." "Of course," Lawrence said. "Take the time you need. Just know that the door is open." As I gathered my things to leave, Gabriel Winters approached. "I have a proposition for you," he said without preamble. "My consulting firm works with companies facing complex technical challenges. Someone with your architectural vision and system design expertise would be an asset to my team. The work is interesting, the clients are diverse, and the compensation is substantial." "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting a conversation about your future," he replied. "My card. Call me when you're ready to discuss possibilities." I accepted his card, tucking it into my pocket alongside the check for $15,000 that Patricia from HR had quietly handed me before I left payment for the first day of my consulting contract. As I walked through the lobby toward the exit, I passed the wall of company milestones that I had helped create. My name appeared nowhere on that wall, though my work was embedded in every achievement it chronicled. That anonymity had once bothered me. Now it felt like freedom. Outside, the autumn sunshine felt different than it had 3 days earlier when I had left this same building in shock and anger. The company that had discarded me now understood my value, but I was no longer defined by their assessment. For the first time in 14 years, my future was entirely my own to determine. The call came Wednesday morning, less than 48 hours after I had restored Techvision's systems. Lawrence Richardson's name appeared on my caller ID. "The board meeting went as expected," he said when I answered. "Cassandra has been asked to resign effective immediately." "And Martin?" I asked. "Continues as CEO but with reduced authority. The board has established an executive oversight committee that will review all major personnel and strategic decisions for the next 6 months." I absorbed this information silently. Corporate consequences had been swift, but they didn't undo the damage already inflicted. "Susan, I would like to make this right," Lawrence continued. "The company owes you not just an apology, but appropriate recognition and compensation for your contributions. I have been authorized to offer you a consulting arrangement under whatever terms you deem fair." "I appreciate that, Lawrence, truly. But before I consider any arrangement, I have conditions." "Name them." "First, a public acknowledgement of what happened. not just internally but a statement to clients and stakeholders that the outage resulted from implementation decisions made after my departure. That can be arranged. Second, fair treatment for the team members who remain. Amanda and Derek in particular deserve recognition and protection for their institutional knowledge. Already underway, the board has authorized retention bonuses and title promotions for key technical staff. And third, a comprehensive review of the severance packages offered to anyone terminated during Cassandra's tenure. 4 weeks for 14 years of service wasn't just insulting to me personally, it represents a fundamental devaluation of experience and loyalty. Lawrence was quiet for a moment. That's more complex from a legal and financial perspective, but I will champion it with the board. You have my word. We discussed terms for a 3-month consulting arrangement that would allow me to help stabilize the systems while the company recruited appropriate technical leadership. The compensation was substantial, reflecting both market rates for my expertise and a tacit acknowledgement of the leverage I now held. The following Monday, I returned to Techvision headquarters for the first time as a consultant, rather than an employee. The atmosphere had changed noticeably. James Parker's office was empty, his name removed from the door. Technical staff greeted me with renewed respect, and executives who had previously ignored me now made points of introducing themselves. In the operations center, I met with Gabriel Winters, who had been retained to conduct a comprehensive security assessment. 10 seconds, he said with a small smile, referencing how quickly he had identified the authentication issue during the crisis. Excuse me. That's how long it took me to recognize that the authentication failure wasn't a bug or an attack, but a security system functioning exactly as designed. I looked at the terminal for 10 seconds, closed my laptop, and just had to laugh. At the situation. At the irony. They had fired the one person who understood the system, then triggered a security protocol that only that person could reset. It was like watching someone change the locks and then throw away the only key. We spent the morning reviewing the authentication architecture with Gabriel, asking insightful questions about design decisions I had made years earlier. His respect for the technical work was evident, as was his disdain for the management decisions that had precipitated the crisis. My offer still stands, he said as we wrapped up. When your consulting engagement here ends, I would welcome you at Winters Consulting. I'll keep that in mind, I replied. Over the following weeks, I worked 3 days per week at Techvision, gradually transitioning knowledge to a newly formed architecture team. The other 2 days, I began building something of my own, a consulting practice focused on helping companies preserve and leverage institutional knowledge during leadership transitions. My first independent client came through a surprising channel. Martin Reynolds, still CEO of Techvision, but chastened by recent events, referred me to a college friend who had just become CEO of a mid-sized software company. They are going through a similar transition, Martin explained. I suggested they might benefit from your perspective on managing technical continuity during leadership changes. That's unexpectedly thoughtful of you, I replied, genuinely surprised. I learned an expensive lesson, he said simply. Perhaps I can help others avoid making the same mistake. By month 3, my independent consulting practice had grown to 4 clients. I hired Amanda, who had decided to leave Techvision despite their belated attempts to retain her. Derek stayed promoted to a new role as chief architect with a mandate to rebuild the technical leadership team. Lawrence Richardson reached out occasionally, keeping me updated on the company's progress and seeking my input on technical strategy questions. The relationship had evolved into something more balanced, a mutual respect between professionals rather than the employer-employee dynamic that had defined our previous 14 years. As my consulting contract with Techvision neared its end, Lawrence invited me to lunch at a restaurant near their headquarters. The company has stabilized, he said over appetizers. The stock has recovered most of its losses, and client confidence is returning. Much of that is due to your work these past 3 months. I am glad to hear it, I replied sincerely. Despite everything, I still cared about the success of the systems I had built and the people who depended on them. The board has asked me to extend an offer, Lawrence continued. A permanent position as Chief Technology Officer, reporting directly to the board rather than to Martin. Complete authority over technical direction and staffing. Compensation comparable to your current consulting rates. The offer was flattering, and 3 months earlier it might have been exactly what I wanted. But so much had changed since then. I'm honored by the offer, I said carefully. But I've discovered something these past few months. I thrive in the advisory role, helping multiple companies navigate complex technical challenges. The independence suits me. Lawrence nodded, seemingly unsurprised. I suspected that might be your answer. You've built something new for yourself, something that leverages your skills while giving you the freedom and recognition you deserve. Exactly. But I'm open to continuing a consulting relationship with Techvision, just not an exclusive one. We would welcome that arrangement, he said, raising his glass in a toast. To new beginnings. As I drove home from that lunch, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. The unceremonious firing that had seemed so devastating had ultimately led to greater opportunities and a more fulfilling professional path. The company that had discarded my expertise had been forced to recognize its value in the most expensive way possible. My new consulting practice was thriving, focused specifically on helping companies manage technical continuity during leadership transitions. I had even begun writing a book about institutional knowledge and its critical role in organizational success, drawing on my experiences without naming the company directly. The healing process had not been instant or easy. There were still moments when the memory of that Friday morning being escorted out by security after 14 years of service stung sharply. But those moments grew less frequent and less painful as I built something new and entirely my own. Perhaps the most valuable lesson had been about the nature of professional worth and identity. For 14 years, I had defined myself largely through my role at Techvision. Being severed from that identity had initially felt like losing a part of myself. But in rebuilding, I had discovered that my value was intrinsic, carried within my knowledge and skills, rather than conferred by a title or company affiliation. That realization was liberating. I was no longer dependent on any single organization's recognition or appreciation. My expertise was mine to offer on my terms to clients who valued it appropriately. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone chimed with an email notification. A potential new client referred by Gabriel Winters, seeking consultation on architectural security for their financial systems. Another opportunity, another chance to share knowledge gained through years of experience. I smiled, thinking of that moment 3 months earlier when I had walked out of Techvision with a cardboard box of personal items, feeling discarded and devalued. How could I have known that it was not an ending, but a beginning? That sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage, that in walking away I would find a better path forward. Have you ever experienced a professional setback that eventually led to something better? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and share with anyone navigating their own career transitions. Remember, sometimes what feels like your worst professional moment can become the catalyst for your greatest success. Thank you for listening, and until next time, trust your worth, even when others fail to see it.